Welcome to Bite Size Dental Marketing. Today I have Rachel. Rachel, it's such a pleasure to have you on. I don't know if you knew this, but your company was our first company crush.
Oh,
Like
nice.
four and 5 years ago, we used to follow you and be like, "Where's Rachel going?" And then like we would try to get in with the same people and show up to the same show. And it's one of those things where you probably don't realize what an impact you had on us. And
Oh,
then through Jessica and Susan Lekowitz and others, like we've really always followed you. And I I do follow your content out there, and I know
thank you.
just a couple of days ago you produced something talking about your thyroid. I guess it was 13 years ago, and the importance of sort of the head and neck oral screening. And
Yes.
I'm so happy that you produce content like that.
Thank you.
I've told the story many times of how we've got started around John Barroso, and he used to go sit with my mom during chemo, but
Mm,
it was actually at her dentist appointment that they first started talking about that she might have something wrong,
mm,
and she should go get checked out. And it was actually him who identified some things going on with her teeth and some things like that. And he said, I think there's some underlying problems, and you should go to your primary care and get checked out. And it did turn out she had cancer. And
wow. I
but
didn't
it was
know
a
that,
dentist
Eric.
that.
Wow.
Mhm. Yeah, and so I'm so glad that we're putting that kind of content out into the world. But what have you been up to? I Last time I talked to you, I think we were talking about staffing and how at the time around 10% of hygienists had left the workforce, and
Yep.
I think that was 2 years ago. And I don't know that any office I have is completely happy with their hygiene staffing at the
Mm-hmm.
moment.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, what have you been up to, and how's everything going?
Thanks, Eric. It's good to reconnect with you. I appreciate you reaching out and inviting me to join your show here. Oh, what have we been up to? We've just working, we're just still doing our thing, growing our team, really trying to get a handle on what's going on, in the world of dentistry and hygiene from a practical sense. Listening to our clients, listening to the hygienists that we work with and what is going well and what their challenges are. We're back to speaking, conferences and things like that, and those have been really well attended. So that's exciting to see that. I would say I think we're all, a bit more. Um, I would say we're a bit more. At least I am more intentional of putting time in my calendar for family, and not
Mhm.
feeling like I have to be everywhere, and say yes to everything. And that has felt really, really good. And you and I were talking in the pre-show just that you've got young kids, I've got teenagers, and yeah, I'm seeing the glimpse of the time when they're not going to be around every day, and I don't want to squander that time that I have with them.
Mhm.
So that's been part of what I've been doing the last couple years too, is how can I be really intentional with the time that I'm spending. And I'm not always great at that. We all goof off on a work day
Mhm.
sometimes, and we
Mhm.
get to the end of the day and we're like, what did I do? I just checked email, responded to email all day long. That wasn't very productive. But sometimes you have to do that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
You
but
mentioned
we've been doing well.
You mentioned, the kids. I read this statistic several years ago that said in the entire life that you will have with your child, um, 90% of the time you spend with them will be before they're the age of 12.
Mm,
And I really think about that as my girls start to get older and
you're
how their
right on that.
activities are taking. And,
Yep.
every night we used to have dinner as a family, and now someone
Mhm.
has swim and someone has dance and someone.
Mhm.
And that's really been mindful of me post COVID. And, we have definitely reset in the home around, everyone's home for dinner. If an
Yep.
activity cuts into dinner, we're moving it. Yeah. I'm so glad. I think that balance is so important
Mhm.
to the longevity of, and just being happy at work. It,
Mhm. For sure.
it's hard to love what you do every day when it's a grind and you don't get the
Mhm.
reward. So I'm glad you're taking
Mhm.
time on yourself.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
I am too. And Kirk Barrett, who's an amazing presence in our industry with Act Dental, he has this talk about 16 summers. We get 16 summers with our kids. So I'm seeing those, like, I think I've got maybe two left with my daughter. So we're going for it this summer. We're gonna do some cool stuff. Yeah.
Oh, that's so
Just
great.
spend
That's
time
so
together. Yeah.
yeah. What are you seeing in hygiene? How, as we talked about earlier, I think every 120 offices, I think every single one could improve their hygiene schedule. They could improve the staffing. The offices that tend to do well, uh, what are you seeing versus the offices that tend to have staffing in a line versus the offices that may be struggling?
Hmm. I think some of it is, I mean, it's all over the board, Eric, right?
Hmm.
And, I would not want to make a judgment on this office, this group of offices is getting right because they're doing X, Y,
Mm.
Z. Some of it is where they're located. Some of it is their proximity to a dental hygiene school. And some of it is culture for sure. How are they presenting themselves in the community? How are they caring for their employees, their team members? Do they have a healthy culture in their practice, or do they have a flexible work environment? Are they challenging their team to learn and grow in a positive way? I think all of those things, play into it. Are they listening? Are they asking their team, like, how are you feeling here? Like, what's going well? What's not going well? What can we work on? And really having that open dialogue and open conversation. So I think there's so many factors
Hmm.
that go into those practices that have solid staffing, and they absolutely are out there. I mean, we're still, working with lots of clients on coaching, and they're doing that because they're willing to invest in the hygienists that are there, and also invest in their practice and having these systems and processes that aren't only reliable on the hygienist, right? So having practice systems, practice standards of care, practice protocols, so that it doesn't change every time the hygienist changes, because that's not in the patient's best interest. They don't get that continuity of care. Um, so we're still, plugging along and working and seeing things improve some, but yeah, it's an interesting time, and I think it
Hmm.
will be for staffing for a while.
Now, what are the trends you're seeing in hygiene today around staffing? My wife's a nurse, and I know that they are moving toward more flexibility.
Hmm.
They're having to modify hours.
Yep.
It's very, very difficult to find a nurse who's willing to work, the traditional 412s.
Yep.
Ha- Are we seeing some of those things cascade into hygiene staffing?
Absolutely. And particularly with the shortage of hygienists, hygienists kind of have the upper hand with regards to what they're requesting. Now, whether or not the dentists um, respond to that, right, in a positive way or not, kind of just depends on, their mindset and what they're thinking. But and I think there's a way that the hygienist can approach this in a positive way that's good for the business and good for them as well. It doesn't have to be so one-sided. But yes, we're absolutely seeing that shift to more flexible work hours, job sharing. I think there will be a large percentage, if there are not already. I'm sorry, I don't have any stats to quote because I've heard some things, but I don't have that, um, right at the tip of my tongue right now. But 30% or more hygienists working in a more of a gig type role than a full-time employee. Certainly, one of the big impacts after COVID with staffing was, we saw, like you said, probably about 10% of hygienists leave the profession. Some have come back, and I would say the other piece that really impacted it was a lot of people did not come back full time. So
Mm.
they may have stayed in the profession, but they came back on a part-time basis. So we weren't able to fully, fulfill all those days that patients are wanting care. Um, but yeah, I think we're going to see that. There is a push. I don't know how loud the voices are yet in this, but for license portability, which the medical community has, a much they're so far ahead of
Hmm.
dentistry
Hmm.
within that regard, and I think that's a good thing. I think it would allow, practices, something that I've seen with practices that are in maybe resort areas or smaller towns that might be in a ski area. If we have license portability, they might be able to attract hygienists from a much bigger pool, for summer activities or skiing or things like that. And honestly, that could create, it seems unstable, but it could create more stability than having a different hygienist in your practice every week.
Yeah. I will say over the last 8 months or so, we have actually had dentists come to us and say we want to punch up our social media, not to get patients, but to help recruiting
For
because
sure.
we're so tired and we want to do more behind the scenes and highlight our culture. You're talking about staffing, and I think we were talking on the pre-show. I think the ramifications to marketing, I think the ramifications to operation, I think they're so powerful. I think you're right.
Hmm.
I think having the office protocols versus having the hygienist lead the protocols and having a strong office manager and having strong scheduling all matters because one of the weird little side things that we see from the instability in hygiene in some offices is the front office is calling patients to move the appointments.
Hmm.
And when they do that, I think those offices really discount the powerful message they're sending that if you can move my appointment, I can now move my own
That's
appointment.
right. That's right.
And now we're seeing this empowerment of these consumers to there's patients to shift around their own appointments, which is incredibly disruptive on the
Yep.
schedule.
Yep.
And I think that's one of those really interesting byproducts of hygiene stability is you got to get someone in there that can see the patients at their scheduled time.
Hmm. Yeah, and here's the thing, in some practices that activity of moving and rescheduling has been happening now for years.
Mm,
So, how I agree with you. We've talked about before the pandemic, we train our patients, so if we're constantly moving their appointment, just like you said, it's teaching them that they can. Or if we say, oh, we've got an appointment for you tomorrow instead of today, then they're going to know it's easy to reschedule.
right.
So yeah, that is disruptive. I think it's going to be interesting and to see what the impact of having practices that have a lot of guest hygienists and maybe don't have as many full-time employees or even part-time, permanent employees. How does that affect their reviews? How does it affect, the retention of patients? Now, the patient may not have a better experience in that aspect if they go to another practice, because if they're in that same area, everybody's probably facing the same challenges. But, how is that going to affect the growth of practices from that perspective? And certainly, I want to say that having a practice protocol, that doesn't mean that your hygienists that are there in your practice are not involved in creating that. They 100% absolutely are,
Mhm.
but it is a practice standard of care. And for me, I've been a guest hygienist over the years, and for me, there's a lot of comfort in that. If I walk into a practice and they say, "Hey, here's the deal. Like, we want you to feel comfortable. We want you to feel supported. We're here for you, and here are our protocols. Here, we've already reviewed the charts for you today, and here's what all these patients need. We're going to have a team member that's going to be here to, support you as much as they can." Man, that would make me feel like so welcome there and like I could actually do a good job instead of just being in there and saying, I'm just here to kind of get through the day so we don't have to reschedule these patients.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
I've been in that position before, and it's hard. It's hard to walk into a practice that you don't know where anything is. You don't know how they operate. You're looking at the charts and trying to like get used to how they're charting and what they're charting, and you've got a patient showing up in 10 minutes. So, if there's a way that we can prepare, um, you know, a debrief for that guest hygienist when they come in, it's not only going to make their day easier, the doctors and the team's day easier, but you're going to have help the patient get a better experience.
Now, what's the best way to communicate those office protocols if you're having temporary hygienists come in? I mean, are you recording a video on your phone and sending it to them, or do you have documentation around it? Ha- eh, I'm trying to think if I were a hygienist coming in to work, X days in a practice, what would I want to walk into?
Right. So so this is something that we're developing right now. And so I think it will be a combination of all the above. I think it could be a brief, even if it's like a 30-minute onboarding call, if you know that you're going to have a guest hygienist for a week or maybe somebody's out on maternity, if it's going to be a longer period of time, I think that everybody's willing to invest more time, right? The
Mhm,
guest
mhm.
hygienist is probably willing to invest, more time to maybe come in one afternoon and just kind of get a lay of the land where everything's located, or even have them come in and shadow for half a day, before they start seeing patients. Now, that's not really practical if you're, trying to fill because somebody's out sick or something like
Hmm.
that. But yes, having something that's pre-recorded that you could send to the hygienist the night before that they could listen to, on their way to work that day. And then having almost like a handbook for them that's really bullet pointed, and having somebody prepare the schedules ahead of time, just even to say, Rachel is, today's the day that she's going to have her FMX. We're going to have it all laid out for you. Um, and then Eric's coming in next, and, it's time for him to have his comprehensive perio evaluation. And here's how we do that. Just even having those things laid out is such a help.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I can see how it is. Because I think you're right. I think we're going to be seeing. I think it's going to be more common than not to have temporary workers
Yep,
in the offices.
I
Yeah.
agree.
Now, what are you, let me switch to sort of the industry trends we were talking about. I will say, and part of it is just the friends of our friends tend to be offices that are, pushing toward fee for service or out of
Mm-hmm.
network. What are you seeing as far as, I think you said something around when you started several years ago, you had, you've almost seen a flip in PPO.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Tell me about what you're seeing when you talk to the doctors that you guys
Mm-hmm.
work with.
Yeah, so 20 years ago when I started Inspired Hygiene, 80% of our clients were fee for service, 20% were in network with some plan. It was usually one or two big plans, in their area. Now I would say up until maybe the last 2 years, 80% were in network and 20% were fee for service. And we are um, pretty quickly seeing that shift. Now, I don't think it'll go all the way back to the other 80/20, but we're seeing a lot of 1 to 2 location, practices dropping over the period of maybe 6 months or a year, everything, even
Hmm.
Delta.
Yeah.
And, still supporting patients with filing the claims and that kind of thing, but going out of network. I'm in some private dental forums. I'm seeing that there as well. And they're able to then support each other right as they're going through this process because it's very scary. Just talked to a client last week. This is a very small practice, and she's in a metropolitan area with a very young population. And yeah, she's like, we're going to go out of everything. So I'm seeing that. And so what that means is, Eric, they're going to need, help from you to differentiate themselves, to create that convenience, to create those relationships with their patients so that they retain those patients and they retain, that role in the community.
Yeah, we've seen it huge, and it's interesting that one of the first things the dentists want to do, because they've done it for years, is send a letter out saying, "I'm not taking Delta anymore,"
Right.
and please do not do that.
Right.
Oh my
Yep.
gosh, it's just opening the floodgate
Yeah.
to all these things, and we've really started. We're not coaches. I don't even like the vernacular when it's a marketing company, but like we've really started talking to our offices and coaching them, if you will allow me to talk out both sides of my mouth on, do not send an email. Like, you need to call
Yeah.
them and you need to talk about what you're going to do and talk about the process, because we have had several dentists begin to get cease and desist letters from Delta as they started
Yes.
to communicate how they were getting out
Yes. And why they were getting out. Yes,
and
I've
why they were
seen
getting
that.
out. And
Yes.
the insurance companies are beginning to get so aggressive about this, and they're using these
Yes.
fear tactics
Mhm.
with the patients and the dentists, and it's just
Mhm.
it you can do it without any of those things.
Mhm.
But yeah, this whole industry, we got to get out and we got to send a letter. Oh my, please don't do that. Yeah.
Well, so you may not want to say you're coaches, but you are, and you're strategists. So that's
Hmm.
part of their strategy of maintaining the flow of customers in their business is to not send them a letter saying you should leave, like, 'cause that's
Yeah.
essentially what it is. And then I've seen, I think probably on social media, right, where a dentist did that and then they had to send a retraction basically. Delta required them to send a retraction to their patients saying, we've got to, they just had to retract some of the things that they had said because it was, they were defaming Delta unintentionally,
No,
right? And no
it's
one
a
would think of that, but man, they zeroed in on that real quick.
it's a really benign comment that Delta's picking up, and it has to do with when a dentist starts talking about Delta is paying lower fees, that is what they're zeroing in on.
Yeah.
And it's not like you're out there saying Delta is the worst company ever and they're terrible. It is Delta has lowered their fees, and we have decided that we're not going to let them dictate quality of care. We're
Hmm.
and there that statement, which is I think a statement from the heart and accurate,
Yeah.
they are picking up on and saying you can't
Mm.
say this is defaming. And yeah, it's the wild wild west out there in
Hmm.
getting out of insurance,
Hmm.
and I hope that offices really take it serious. But I will say we have had, and there's a lot of fear mongering around getting out of insurance, but we have had in some of the rural parts and even some of the suburbs of our offices, very, very heavy Delta,
Hmm.
50, 60%. And we've seen them get out and only lose about 5 to 10% of the patient
Wow.
base. And they complain about that 10 and sometimes it's 15, but honestly, those are the people who aren't accepting treatment above what the insurance pays
Right.
anyway. It's not your best patients you're losing. You're losing the sort of folks who are already having to be worked around treatment plans and spread out over multiple years. You're not losing your top 40, 50, 60, 80% of patients. You're losing sort
Hmm.
of the ones who
Hmm.
are really only doing what insurance would pay for anyway. And
Yeah, and I think if you're also combining that with making it very clear to your patients how you can work with them for them to be able to afford the treatment that you're recommending, right? Creative financing, being forward with that instead of waiting for somebody to ask for a payment plan, like just being upfront with that.
mhm, mhm,
I think that can help offset it. I would say I've got to mention this, and I did not come up with this, so I have to give credit to Teresa Duncan and Lois Bantu, who would be great guests for your show, by the way. Is Teresa was one of the first people that I heard say, "Don't send a letter. Like talk to your patients as they're in your office.
mhm,
Like
mhm,
start 6 months early, or start at 6 months prior to when you plan on, um, stepping away from your contract and start because you have a relationship with these people. So build on that, build on the relationship. Um, because if we just send out the letter, they feel like we're dropping them. And then Lois always says, don't ever say that. It's we're changing the way that we're working with your insurance company. We're shifting the way that we work with
mhm.
United Concordia or whatever that might be. It doesn't mean that we're dropping the patient. um, we're just changing the way that we're working with that. It doesn't mean that we're necessarily not going to file your claims or, it's just that to me is so simple, and so beautiful, both of those things, and really can go a long way.
Yeah, we completely agree, and that is wonderful advice. I like to almost triage the patients and say these are the folks that the office manager is going to sit down with and
Mm-hmm.
talk to about a health plan, and we can say
Mm-hmm.
we're rolling out as part this health plan. You're going to get 2 or 3 free cleanings, and
Yep.
I hate to use the word free, but I
Yeah.
wouldn't ever use that with the patient. But
Yeah.
you'll be able to
Included. Mm-hmm.
right include it, and this is what it's going to look like, and
Mm-hmm.
we'd love to keep you, and then these are the people that this person almost assign them who they're most connected with
Mm.
and start talking through it. But that's wonderful advice.
Mm-hmm.
I can't stress enough that the connection that the offices have is so deep, and it's a pain to go to another office. Like
It
just
is.
just filling out paperwork alone sends some people into some form of anxiety, and it's just not fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just today, you were talking about this. I just had some surgery right here, and the scarring is not going the way I want it to go. So I'm like, do I go back to the dermatologist that I've had an okay experience with over the years, but it's, 30 minutes away, or do I go to this new dermatologist, just new to my office complex? It's literally like my back door opens to their front door. And so I go online and I'm like, yeah, I got to call, make a new patient appointment. It is a pain, but I'm doing it. because ultimately it's going to be better. And the reviews were incredible,
Mhm,
even
mhm.
specific to what I'm dealing with. So I was like, okay, I'm in. Like, let's just
But
see how I can get in with this person. Yeah.
that I think that's a perfect example of how high the bar is to leave. Like it wasn't automatic. You had to go
No,
read a review and think about it
I
and
thought about it for like a month actually.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Now, you spoke one time at one of our town halls, and I think you're a phenomenal speaker. I've loved it. What
Thank you.
is next for you in speaking? Where are you going? What I I saw you had a book. I saw you have other things going on.
Mhm.
What's next in the world of inspired
Mhm.
hygiene and Rachel Wall?
What's next in the world of Inspired Hygiene and Rachel? I'm going to be updating the book. So I wrote my book, Return on Hygiene, gosh, probably in 2018. So it's time for an update to that book.
Mhm.
We are just developing ways that we can further support our clients and their longevity. And, our clients come to us to help either uh, really create solid systems and elevate the services of their hygiene department because maybe they don't have any they've just kind of been running, working on other parts of their practice, and now it's time to focus on hygiene. Or maybe they did some work on with the hygiene department in the past, and they want to really refine and take things to the next level with regards to, really caring for the patient in a high level by fully integrating their hygiene care into how it can impact the patient's overall health. How do we integrate some of these new products, some of the new technologies that are out there? So, with our clients that come to us, they're asking, like, how do we stay connected to you for longer? So, we're building something like that. It's going to be called Legacy within Inspired Hygiene. So excited about that. Where am I speaking? I'm speaking a lot of study clubs, actually. I just had a fantastic time at Hinman this year, spring of 2023. It was awesome. I love speaking at Hinman. But I will be speaking a lot of study clubs. That's something I really love to do for doctors and for hygienists combined. So, for example, we're doing like a Thursday night doctor event, just talking about some of the trends of the hygiene department and how doctors can really support a thriving hygiene department,
Mhm.
even in the environment that we're in. And then the next day is more of a CE for, the teams and the hygienists. We're doing that. Um, I just also joined on the team for Cellerant. Cellerant is a leader in consulting technology and dental manufacturers and dental businesses. And so I've joined their team. They're the ones that do the best in class awards for
Mm.
for
Mhm.
dental products. And so I've joined their hygiene best in class team that gets to like evaluate and decide on what those awards are. And we'll be doing some like corporate consulting with some dental corporations through them. So that's exciting. And our team at Inspired Hygiene is just rocking and rolling. They're doing awesome. They're an amazing group of individuals. Um, and we really enjoy working together and being able to impact our client practices so that they can in turn, have a positive impact on their patients.
Yeah, I still think back so fondly on the days of Dr. Heller and getting
Yeah.
him, and he's retiring soon. I mean, he's
Yeah.
still at it, but it was so rewarding to have you come in and get his hygiene up to speed, and Jessica handle the CFO and me handle the chief marketing. It was such a wonderful experience, and
It was.
it's such a testament, I think, to the company you build and the product
Thank you.
that you have. So, thanks so much for jumping on the show. I know it's
Absolutely. My pleasure.
you're so busy, and it's so humbling that you would take time for us. So, thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for reaching out to me, Eric. It's a pleasure to reconnect. And yeah, that was fun time. And I have to say, I have to give Dr. Heller all the credit for, being willing to invest and surround himself you know, in the twilight of his career so that he really could go out. He's just a person of such integrity and just go out knowing he has done everything he could to care for his practice and his patients and really set it up in a way that's going to just continue to thrive even when he's, you know, playing golf and hanging with his grandkids and all those things.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Rachel, thanks again for jumping on, and that was your bite of dental marketing for the day.